In 1984, at one of the American prisons, the guard in charge of the outer gate received a call from the prison supervisor. The supervisor told him there was a bomb in Building 1, and he ordered him to open the prison gates, take a van, and bring it straight to the building. The prison was surrounded by fencing, and the entrance wasn't just one gate, it was actually two gates facing each other. Prison rules strictly stated that both gates could never be opened at the same time, but now it was an emergency. There was a bomb in the building, so against the rules, the gate guard opened both gates at the same time, then he led the van into the prison. When it reached the building where the bomb was supposed to be, the bomb squad came out wearing their heavy protective suit, carrying the bomb with them. One of them was spraying it with a fire extinguisher, like he was trying to cool it down so it wouldn't explode. The bomb squad placed the bomb inside the van and immediately drove straight out of the prison through the gates that were already open in front of them. The guards watching that whole scene unfold thought they had just avoided a disaster. They believed the nightmare was over, but what they didn't know was that this was actually the beginning of the disaster, because the bomb squad, the 6 men who just walked out through the open prison gates, were not a bomb technicians at all. They were inmates, and not just any inmates. All 6 of them were in death row. Every single one of them was a convicted murderer. Some of them were even serial killers. So now we've got 6 convicted killers on the run, ready to do whatever it takes to hold on to their freedom. I don't even need to tell you what happened next was insane. But before all that, how did they even pull off an escape like this? Where did the bomb come from? How did they even get out of their cells? And where did they get the guard's uniform? If you want the answers, keep watching. What's up, guys? And if you're new here, I'm Hido. I'm into tech and storytelling. Please like and subscribe before we start. Let's get started, shall we? The events of our story took place in U.S. state of Virginia, specifically at Mecklenburg Correctional Center. At the time, it was considered a maximum security prison, and it had a special unit where inmates sentenced to death were held. That unit was called C Unit, and it was located inside Building 1. This is the exact unit and the exact building the death row inmates escaped from. The escape happened on May 31st, 1984 at 11 p.m. Of course, the moment the escape was discovered, they were a full statewide emergency. All law enforcement agencies were mobilized. The police, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, even the governor's office. They literally woke the governor up. This was the first time in U.S. history that death row inmates had escaped from prison. We've got 6 convicted killers on the streets. There was zero room for delay, no room for mistakes. They had to find them, and they had to find them fast. The search operation started immediately after the escape was discovered. Helicopters were in the air, patrol cars flooded the streets, officers and K9 units were out on foot. They began a systematic sweep of the area surrounding the prison, covering several miles in every direction. The Army and the National Guard were alerted to be on standby, and the FBI office in Virginia immediately sent in their top investigators to talk over the case. All the officials were terrified for the safety of the public. If any civilians crossed paths with these inmates, it could turn into a disaster. These were convicted killers on death row. They could take someone's life without hesitation if they needed to, or even if they didn't. Just for the thrill of it, there was nothing holding them back. No conscience, no fear of consequences. They were already sentenced to death. The investigators arrived at the prison, where they were met by the warden. They immediately started asking him for details. The warden told them that when they entered C Unit in Building 1, the place was completely trashed. The guards had been locked up and restrained. The inmates were the one in control of the unit. The investigators then asked for the identities of the escaped inmates, and right away it was clear this was bad. Like we said, all 6 were killers, but 2 of them were even more dangerous than the rest. Those 2 were actually brothers, James Briley and Linwood Briley. The Briley brothers were leaders of a gang, and the number of victims ranged somewhere between 11 and 20 people. Authorities weren't even sure of the exact number. Every single murder they committed was brutally violent. Let me give you just one example. In one of the crimes, James Briley assaulted a woman in front of her husband and her 5-year-old son. Then he murdered the entire family, including the 5-year-old son. The 3rd inmate was named Eric Clinton. He killed an elderly woman. After that, he was granted conditional release while waiting for his full trial. And during the release period, he murdered another woman, an elementary school librarian. He stabbed her 8 times in the head, then took her belt and strangled her until she died. The 4th inmate was named Lim Tego. His crime was kidnapping and murdering 2 elderly women, both over 60 years old. I mean, why them? The 5th inmate was named Derek Peterson. He walked into a supermarket, stole $6,000, and then killed the store manager. He robbed him and then murdered him. For what? The sixth and the final inmate was Willie Johns. He broke into the home of an elderly couple, killed the husband, then told his wife to pray to God, and after that he killed her too. Then he set the house on fire. So now I think you understand just how dangerous these 6 men were and why officials are absolutely terrified after this escape. The lead investigator of the case was confident they will eventually catch them, sooner or later. What he was really afraid of was catching them after they had already hurt or killed innocent people. Outside, the search unit were fully active. Police officers across the entire state were involved in this operation. Roadblocks and checkpoints were set up on major highways, and the search perimeter kept expanding because the more time that passed, the greater the chance the inmate had gotten farther away, especially since they had a vehicle. They could have headed north, south, east, west, nobody knew. So now the investigators needed any lead that could point them in the right direction. The first thing they did was return to C unit, the same unit the inmates escaped from. They found it exactly how it was left, completely trashed. And like we mentioned earlier, when the escape was first discovered, the guards had been tied up and locked inside that very unit. So the investigators went into the cells where the inmates had been held and searched them thoroughly. But they didn't find any direct evidence or clue that could tell them where the inmates might have gone. What did they find though was disturbing. They discovered knives and sharp tools that the inmates had handmade inside the prison, and they had hidden them in clever spots. For example, one knife was concealed inside the leg of a table. That's when investigators realized something important. The escaped inmates were armed. Yes, technically just homemade blades and shanks, but still armed, and that made them even more dangerous. After finishing the search of the cells, the investigators moved on to interrogate the guards from C unit. The guards, the one who had been found tied up, were questioned first. The investigators asked them if they had any information about where the inmates might have headed after escaping. Maybe they overheard them talking, maybe they caught a word here or there, but the guards denied hearing anything. They said the inmates never discussed or mentioned any specific place they were planning to go. At that point, the investigators' suspicion slowly started shifting toward the guards themselves. Maybe one of them had helped the inmates, because this unit, the one the inmates escaped from, was supposed to be heavily fortified, secured with strict safety measures. And the investigators knew that prison guards are one of the most vulnerable to bribery, especially since their salaries weren't exactly great. Their working conditions were exhausting too. Guards were constantly complaining that inmates would assault them or put them in dangerous situations. So the investigators sat down with the guards and asked them exactly what happened. How did the inmates manage to restrain them? How did they take their uniforms? And how did they get out of the building so easily? The guards told them that about 2 months earlier, one of those same inmates from C unit had sent an anonymous letter to the state prosecutor's office. In the letter, there was a warning. It said there was a bomb hidden inside C unit, and that some of the inmates were planning to use it to try and escape from prison. The letter was anonymous. No one knew which inmate had sent it, but it eventually led the warden to order a full search operation inside C unit. A group of supervisors and guards went in and began searching the cells one by one. They pulled the inmates out, searched all their belongings, and even brought in K9 units. But they found nothing. No bomb, no materials that could even be used to build one. In the letter, the anonymous inmate claimed that the bomb was being prepared as part of an escape plan by some of the prisoners. He also said the plan involved overpowering the guards, taking their uniform, and discussing themselves. So it turns out that tip wasn't actually from same inmate trying to expose a conspiracy. It was from the same inmates who were planning to escape, a fake warning set up on purpose, so that when they finally used the bomb trick, the guards would instantly believe it. At this point, the investigators were starting to feel one or maybe more of the guards had to be involved somehow. So they began questioning them one by one, everything that happened in the unit before the inmates escaped. And through the guards' testimonies and the details they shared, the investigators slowly began to piece together in their mind exactly how the inmates pulled off the escape on the night it happened. The inmates were out in the prison yard doing their scheduled outdoor activities for the day. On that particular day, they were playing basketball, and 5 guards were watching over them. One of the inmates, his name was Willie Turner, walked up to the guard with another inmate beside him. They told the guard they wanted to go back to their cells. One of them claimed he had a knee injury. The other said he needed to use the bathroom. You might think wanting to go back to their cells is normal, their personal choice, maybe even giving up their recreation time. But the problem problem was that went against prison policy. An inmate was required to stay out for the full duration of the scheduled yard time, and if one inmate or even a few of them wanted to go back early, then everyone had to return with them. So now, in order to take just 2 inmates back to their cells, 2 guards had to escort them. And remember, there were only 5 guards out there watching the yard. Here's the problem: the guards were getting a little too relaxed with the rules. What ended up happening is that 2 of the 5 guards walked those 2 inmates back inside, which meant the rest of the yard was now being watched by only 3 guards. 3, that's fewer eyes. And when you've got a fewer eyes in a group of death row inmates, it becomes a lot easier for someone to make a move without anyone noticing. When the outdoor time was over, the guards told the inmates, "Alright, time's up. Head back to the building, let's go back to your cells." As the inmate walked back with the 3 guards, the guards weren't really paying close attention. They weren't focused. They weren't expecting anything to happen. When they entered the building, there was another guard section there, the one in charge of the gate. In front of him, there was a control panel filled with buttons, like that like and subscribe button. With a push of a button, he could open or close the doors. Since all the locks were electronically controlled, the guards weren't following prison policies at all. And get this, they didn't even count the inmates, something that should have been the most basic protocol. And then suddenly the inmates created chaos. They started shoving each other, raising their voices, making a scene. And remember, they were still in the section gate area. They had already passed through the outer gate, but they hadn't gone through the inner gate that leads to the cells yet. All the attention of the 3 guards plus the section gate guard shifted toward the inmates and the commotion they were causing. And in that exact moment, no one noticed one of the inmates quietly opening the bathroom door behind them and slipping inside. The bathroom was for guards only, and the inmate who went in was Eric Clayton.
His job was simple: stay inside and wait for a specific signal that would come later from the other.
So he stayed in there holding the lock from the inside, which meant that even if someone tried to open the door, they'd assume someone was inside or that the lock was just stuck. And the plan kept moving. While Eric Clayton was inside the bathroom, the guards were busy trying to calm things down and regain control of the chaos the inmate had just created. And then, just like that, the inmates suddenly settled down because they had already gotten what they wanted: their guy was inside the bathroom. The guards had no idea what had just happened, and since they hadn't already done a proper hit count when the inmates came in, they didn't even realize one of them was missing. The inmates knew that. They exploited it. They understood that the guards weren't even following the most basic protocols. Anyway, once things calmed down, the guards opened the door to the cell area and escorted the inmates inside. Just like that, they left the gate area. Meanwhile, Eric Clayton was still hiding in the bathroom, and they had no idea. After a while, one of the guards tried to open the bathroom door. It wouldn't open because Clayton was holding the lock from the inside. When that guard tried to report it to the section gate guard, the response was simple: "It's fine, just use another restroom." Even though prison policy clearly stated that if any door was locked or jammed and wouldn't open, maintenance had to be called immediately to inspect and fix it. But that protocol ignored. Now, building 1 inside the prison had 3 units: A unit, B unit, C unit. C unit was the one designated for death row inmates, and C unit itself was divided into 2 separate cell blocks. Each block was isolated from the other, and between them sat the C unit control room. Inside that room was a guard responsible for operating the gates. According to that guard, the escape plan really began when one of the inmates knocked on the glass window to get his attention. That inmate was holding a book, and according to him, he just wanted to pass the book to another inmate in the second cell block of C unit. And that's when things started to move. So basically, this inmate was in one of the 2 cell blocks, and he wanted to pass the book he had to another inmate in the second block. And the only thing separating the 2 blocks was the gate control room. The inmate was talking to the guard through the phone line that connects the cell block to the control room. He said he wanted to give the book to James Briley, one of the Briley brothers we talked about earlier. The gate guard replied, "Alright, I'll give it to him." He stepped out of the control room and closed the door behind him, but not all the way. He didn't fully secure it. He left it slightly cracked open, and that was his habit. The inmates had noticed that before, and they decided to build their plan around that exact habit. Meanwhile, inside the cell block, the inmates were getting ready for the escape. One of them was named Willie Turner. He was skilled with his hands. He could literally turn nothing into a weapon. He would take small metal pieces from bathrooms or from edges of doors and grind them against stone until they became sharp. He had developed multiple methods for crafting these homemade blades, and he was just as good at hiding them inside boxes, inside tables, in places guards would never think to check. Investigators believe he was actually the mastermind behind the entire operation because he was actually the smartest one among them. But pay attention here. Willie Turner is not the same person as Willie Jones, one of the 6 who escaped. Willie Turner, in fact, did not escape, even though he was the key planner behind the whole thing, and we will come back to that later. What matters right now is that Willie Turner handed out the weapons and shanks he had made to the others and told told them to get ready. The plan was about to begin, and it all started with a book. Like we said, the gate guard agreed to take it. When he stepped out of the control room, he left the door slightly open, just like he always did. He walked over, took the book from the first inmate through the slot in the door, then crossed to the other side to hand it to the second inmate in the other cell block. When the guard gave the book to James Briley, James raised his voice and said, "Thanks for the book." Why did he say it out loud? Because that was the signal. The signal that Eric Clatton, hiding in the bathroom, was being waiting for. The second Eric Clatton heard the words, "Thanks for the book," he rushed out of the bathroom and headed straight to the gate control room. He hit the button that opens the cell block gate, and just like that, all door popped open, and the entire place exploded into chaos. The inmates pulled out their weapons and charged the guards. In the blink of an eye, the guards became the prisoners, and the prisoners became the guards. Within just minutes, the inmates had complete control over C unit. They restrained every guard in the unit and locked them up. They strapped them down to their underwear, took their batons, the only weapons they had, even took their wallets and cash. Now that the inmates had full control of C unit and had isolated it from the rest of the prison buildings, the next step was clear. They needed a high-ranking officer because the guards they had captured didn't have enough authority to order something like open the main gate. They needed someone with a high rank to make that happen. So they forced one of the captured guards to call the prison supervisor. This supervisor held the rank of lieutenant. Under threat, the guard told him there was an emergency in C unit. He said one of the inmates had been seriously injured in a fight with another inmate, and he requested that the lieutenant come in person to handle the situation. But the lieutenant was in another building, far from C unit, and couldn't get there quickly. So instead, he sent the officer in charge of the shift, someone lower in rank. When that officer entered C unit, he saw what looked like a guard sitting inside the gate control room, and he asked to be let in. What he didn't know was that it wasn't a real guard. It was an inmate wearing a guard uniform, pretending to be the gate officer. The moment he stepped inside, the inmates rushed him and restrained him. He didn't stand a chance. He didn't even have time to contact anyone outside the unit. Using that same tactic, the inmates kept luring in more guards and officers from different ranks into C unit. And every time someone arrived, they captured them. They took his uniform and locked him up with the others. It wasn't just officers either. They even captured the nurse assigned to their unit. The nurse was of course terrified. In the end, the inmates locked her alone inside one of the cells. Then one of the criminals, Eric Clatton, went in after her. He intended to assault her. She started screaming for help. The captured guards could hear her from inside their cells, and you can imagine the rage building inside them. A little later, Linwood Briley joined Clatton on that cell, but moment after that, another inmate rushed in and started yelling at them, calling them out for what they were doing. Then Willie Turner, the mastermind behind the whole plan, stepped in and he snapped it at them. "Is this really what you're thinking about right now in the middle of our operation? Have you lost your minds?" So the two men stopped what they were trying to do and left the nurse alone. She was later questioned by investigators, and she's the one who shared those details about what happened inside that cell. Now the investigators were reconstructing everything in their mind based on the guards' testimonies. At the same time, the criminals were still out there, no trace of them. 2 hours had already passed since the escape, and police knew that every minute that went by made it harder to catch them. So every 30 minutes they expanded the search perimeter. All available law enforcement resources across the state were involved, but nothing, no sightments, no leads. Investigators continued questioning guards and prison officers. Every guard described how he was restrained and overpowered by inmate wearing the stolen guard uniforms. Each time they captured the guard, they took his clothes and used them to lure the next one into the trap. According to the guards' statements, James Riley actually wanted to kill some of the guards. He told the others there were too many of them, and he was worried they might lose control. But Willie Turner, the mastermind behind the operation, convinced him to back down. He explained that committing more murders would only make things worse and complicate the situation even further. Now let's go back to the lieutenant, the supervisor they had called in the beginning. He's the one who had been contacted first, but instead of coming himself, he had sent the shift officer. Later on, the lieutenant tried to reach the guards in C unit to check on the situation. No answer, nobody picked up the phone, and the officer he had sent never called back either. That's when he started getting suspicious, so he decided to go to C unit himself and see what's going on. When he arrived, he entered through the stairwell door instead of the main entrance to the unit. As a prison supervisor, he had keys to every door, but once he went in through the stairwell, the door automatically locked behind him. While he was checking the area, the inmates wearing stolen guard uniforms ambushed him. They restrained him and locked him up with the rest. Now they had a lieutenant, and that meant the rest of the plan just got easier. At that point, they decided to move to the exit phase. The first thing they did was gather the captured guards and lock them inside the janitor's room and C unit.
Then they shut the door behind them. The only person they talked with them was the lieutenant. At that point, they were still in C unit, which was located in building 1. They had already taken control of the control room that operated the doors inside C unit, but there was another control room at the entrance of building 1, the one that operated the main gate of the building. Inside that room was a female guard on duty. The room was fully secured from every side. There is no way the inmates could access it unless she personally opened the doors for them. So to make that happen, they forced the lieutenant to call her. They made him tell her that another guard would be coming to replace her. The moment she heard his voice, she knew it was the lieutenant. The request was unusual. Guards weren't normally replaced in the middle of a shift, but she didn't question it. He was her direct superior. If he told her something, why would she doubt it? Aaron Clanton walked out alongside Derek Peterson and they headed toward the building's gate control room. When the female guards saw them, she immediately opened the door. It never crossed her mind there were inmates wearing stolen uniforms. How could she know? Her supervisor had just told her a replacement guard was coming. The two men walked in, grabbed her and restrained her. And just like that, the inmates now controlled every single door inside building 1. There was still one major obstacle left, the main outer gate of the prison. And that gate wasn't just one door, it was actually two gates facing each other. And like we mentioned earlier, they were never supposed to be opened at the same time.
But now the inmates had the lieutenant, and the lieutenant had the authority to give orders and unlock any door. So they forced him to call the outer gate guard, just like we talked about in the beginning. The lieutenant told him there was a bomb in C unit. He ordered him to open both gates immediately and to bring a van into the prison and drive it straight to building 1 because it was an emergency. What made the whole story believable was that an anonymous letter from 2 months earlier, the one that warned about a bomb in C unit, we already talked about it, the searches, the inspection that followed. So when the gate guard heard bomb in C unit, it didn't sound crazy, it made sense. And most likely, like we said before, the inmates themselves had read in that letter. They planted the idea in the guards' minds. So when the moment came, the lie would feel real. So the gate guard followed the lieutenant's orders. He opened both gates. He brought one of the prison vans inside and drove it straight to building 1. Meanwhile, one of the inmates grabbed a small TV from one of the cells. The plan was to wrap it in a blanket and pretend it was a bomb. Now here's something important. Not every inmate involved in the operation actually planned to escape. Some of them had to stay behind the control rooms to keep opening doors. And some of them didn't even want to escape at all. They just wanted to be part of it. Prison is boring. Anything that breaks the routine feels exciting. Even Willie Turner, the guy believed to be the mastermind, didn't escape with him. It seems he had an appeal pending on his death sentence and he was waiting for the outcome. But since he clearly participated in the escape and helped the others, and there were plenty of witnesses, it's hard to believe that appeal going in his favor. Honestly, no one knows what he was thinking. Anyway, the ones who actually escaped were 6, the same 6 we talked about earlier. Before leaving the building, they broke into a room that stored riot control gear for the guards. They grabbed helmets and shields. They also took a stretcher, the kind used to carry injured people. They placed a small TV on it, covered it with a blanket, and presented it as a bomb. Once they put on the helmets and heavy gear, their identities were even more concealed. Any guard seeing them from a distance would assume they were some kind of a special unit. Meanwhile, the main gate guard had already brought the van and parked it outside building 1. He had no idea what was really happening inside. All he knew was that there was supposedly a bomb in the building. Suddenly, the inmates rushed out in disguise and yelled at him to get back immediately. They told him they had a bomb that could explode at any second. One of them even started spraying a fire extinguisher to sell the illusion. The poor guard believed what he saw. He thought there was some kind of tactical or bomb disposal team, so he backed away instantly. And just like that, the inmates got into the van and calmly drove out through the prison gates that were already wide open in front of them. So that's how the escape happened, the version that investigators were able to piece together after questioning the guards. In the end, they dropped the theory that a guard had helped the inmates. The real disaster wasn't corruption, it was negligence, weak performance, basic mistakes, and the inmates knew exactly how to exploit every single one of them. But unfortunately, interrogating the guards didn't give investigators any clue about where the inmates went after they escaped. The search outside the prison was still ongoing, massive and intense. 3 hours had now passed since they escaped, and there was still no trace of them, which meant one thing: they could be very far from the prison. Now let's look at the events from the perspective of the 6 inmates who escaped. After leaving the prison, they kept driving the van for a while. They were riding that wave of victory, the adrenaline rush after pulling off something huge. And that height apparently made them forget one important detail. They were driving a prison van with the prison's name and the logo clearly painted on it. As they driving down the road, they passed a police officer on his regular night patrol. They waved at him, he waved back. You might be thinking, wait, didn't you say the entire state were searching for them? So how did this officer not know? Because he wasn't in the same state. They had already crossed the state lines. They left Virginia, where the prison was located, and entered North Carolina. And at that point, the news hadn't reached law enforcement in North Carolina yet, especially since this happened within the first hour of the escape. The alert hadn't fully spread. When the officer saw the prison van, he assumed it was just a routine inmate transport. They were wearing guard uniforms, and nighttime transfers are common. They are usually done after dark for security reasons. Less visibility, fewer risks of interference. After that encounter with the officer, the adrenaline rush started to fade. The reality hit them. They were driving a prison vehicle, and that van could expose them at any second. So they began arguing where to go next and how to get rid of it. One of them suggested finding a forest, hiding the van between the trees and covering it with branches. But that would take time, and they were already nervous, afraid someone might spot the vehicle. After driving a little further, they reached a small town called Winton. There, they found a relatively secluded spot surrounded by trees. So they decided to abandon the van right there. They jumped out quickly and split into two groups. The first group had four men: James Briley, his brother Linwood Briley, Willie Jones, and Lim Tegel. The second group consisted of Eric Clanton and Derek Peterson. The first group of four kept running through the woods and brush, and luck was somehow on their side. They came across a clothes hanging on a laundry line outside the house, so they stripped off the stolen guard uniforms and changed it into regular clothes. Blending in just became a whole lot easier. By that point, 3.5 hours had already passed since the escape began. And finally, police found their first real lead. A patrol unit was driving near the area where the inmate had abandoned the van. By now, news of the escape had spread. Alerts had reached law enforcement in North Carolina as well. When an officer spotted the van with the name of Mecklenburg Correctional Center printed on it, he immediately called for backup. Multiple units responded to the scene. They approached the vehicle with extreme caution, but in the end, it was empty. The inmates had ditched it and continued on foot. Inside the van, officers found the helmets and riot gear the escapees had used. The vehicle was about 50 kilometers away from the prison, which meant it was outside the original search perimeter the authorities had been sweeping. The discovery was immediately reported to the officials and investigators leading the case. The command center was located in Winton, where the van had been found. From that point on, the operation became a joint effort between law enforcement in Virginia and North Carolina, and the FBI was officially brought in to take over the investigation. Because once the inmate crossed state lines, it became a federal case. The search perimeter was now centered around the town where the van had been found. Investigators immediately assumed the inmates had split into smaller groups. Staying together as one large group would only increase their chances of getting caught. The logical move of them was to scatter. Description of the escapees were circulated statewide and then nationwide. The FBI alerted law enforcement agencies across the country that 6 death row inmates were in the run. The goal was simple. Every department needed to stay on a high alert in case any of them crossed into their jurisdiction. Back in the command center, investigators were studying maps and calculating distances. They tried to estimate how far the inmates could travel with each passing minute. At the same time, they began digging into inmates' backgrounds. They looked into family members, relatives, and anyone the inmates had been in contact while in prison, because the most likely scenario, they would run into someone they knew, someone they trusted. Police also set up a dedicated hotline, asking the public to report any sightings or information related to the escaped criminals. Around 5 a.m., police received a call from a local resident. A man reported that his backup truck had been stolen from right in front of his house. He lived in the same town, Winton. Within minutes, officers and investigators arrived at his home. The first thing they asked him was a description of the vehicle. He told them it was a blue pickup truck with a red section in the back. He said it was easy to recognize because the license plate was distinctive, PEI-1. He also mentioned that he had just filled the gas tank completely, which meant that if the escapees were the one who took it, they could travel a long distance. Police immediately broadcast the vehicle description, but in that moment they realized something bigger. The search perimeter had to expand, and not just a little, potentially hundreds of miles, because now the fugitives had transportation, and that meant they could be anywhere. Authorities also hiding alerts in neighboring states. By sunrise, the escapees could easily cross state lines again. As the sun came up, there was still no sign of them. Police set up roadblocks in every major road, especially around Winton. Every vehicle was stopped, every vehicle was searched. All available law enforcement personnel in the area were deployed, from traffic units to tactical team. Everyone was involved. There was no budget limit on this manhunt. No cabin resources, helicopters were circling overhead, officers were spread out on the ground, patrol cars flooded the streets, K9 units were tracking through fields and wooded areas. The operation was running 24/7 and still nothing. No trace, no confirmed sighting. But this massive show of force had an unexpected side effect. The town's residents were terrified. They woke up to the sound of helicopters and police sirens. When they stepped outside, they saw roadblocks everywhere. Then they turned around the news and found out that 6 dangerous girls were escaped from prison and that they had been in their town the night before. No one knew if they were gone or still hiding nearby. Fear spread through Winton. People were afraid to leave their homes, afraid to walk down their own streets, because somewhere out there were 6 men with nothing to lose. And men like that will do anything if they think it helps them survive. Even residents in nearby counties and surrounding areas started to panic. According to the news, the escapees could be anywhere. They might already be inside their communities. And what made things worse, the media began digging into the criminals' pasts. They replayed the details of the brutal crimes they had committed. Attacks on elderly women in their 70s. Entire families murdered. Even a 5-year-old child killed in front of his parents. Imagine hearing this and knowing those same men might be somewhere near you right now. People in Winton and surrounding areas flooded local gun stores. They were buying firearms and ammunition in massive quantities. It got to the point where stores completely ran out of inventory. Not a single weapon left.
There was a lot of tension, a lot of fear. I remember people talking, saying they had their guns and, if anybody came on their step, they would shoot them.
And here's where things got even worse. People started being afraid of the police too, because they knew the escapees had worn guard uniforms. So how did you trust that officer standing at your door isn't actually one of them? That's why when the police started knocking on doors, asking questions, trying to gather info, it wasn't easy.
People were extremely afraid and scared, and people were going around door to door making announcements that lock your doors, lock your cars. A lot of people didn't sleep there for a few nights.
A lot of residents refused to cooperate. Some wouldn't even open the door. Families locked themselves inside their home. Doors bolted, lights off, no one coming in. Some of them didn't sleep for days. Some families even set up their own watch shifts inside the home, making sure someone was always awake, always alerted, and always holding a weapon just in case. Police were trying to calm people down and help them, especially women and the elderly residents who needed groceries or basic supplies but were too afraid to go out. Some officers went to the stores themselves to buy food and necessities for them. Overall, the town and the surrounding areas were living in fear, and that fear showed up in the number of calls coming into the police. The phone lines were flooded. Even with all the manpower involved, there was no way they could respond to every single tip immediately. Almost every minute someone was claiming that he spotted one of the escapees somewhere. But the day after they escaped, June 1st, 1984, something significant happened. Around 5 p.m., Eric Clatton and Derek Peterson were walking through the streets in town in broad daylight. 5 in the afternoon. No one knows if they had gotten careless or if they were trying to act confident. Like maybe if they just walked normally down the streets, no one would suspect a thing. They had already ditched the guards' uniforms and changed it into different clothes, but Eric Clatton kept the guard jacket. After removing the badge and identifying patches, maybe he logged how it looked. Maybe he just didn't think it through. Either way, he kept it. The two of them walked into a public laundromat. In the US, laundromats run in coins. You drop in some change and use the machine, but they weren't there to wash clothes. They were looking for a place that felt somewhat isolated, somewhere they could sit and eat. They just bought some food from a nearby store and they were starving. They needed a place to sit down without drawing attention, and the only place they found was the laundromat. To them, it seemed quiet enough, hidden enough. Unfortunately for them, at that exact moment, a patrol car happened to drive past the laundromat, and it wasn't just any patrol unit. It belonged to the head of the prison's response team. This was someone who knew prison guard uniforms inside and out. The second he saw the jacket Eric Clatton was wearing, something didn't sit right. Even though the badge and patches were gone, the color and design were unmistakable for him. He immediately made a U-turn and pulled up to the laundromat. He and his partner stepped out, weapons drawn carefully. They walked inside and found Clayton and Derek Peterson sitting there eating. They ordered them to put their hands up and face the wall. Their time as free men hadn't even lasted 19 days, not even a full day. Journalists rushed to the scene and cameras captured the moment of their arrest. And while their capture was technically good news, it was also terrifying because it meant two of the most dangerous fugitives had been casually walking around town, inside stores, public streets. And suddenly the people who hadn't been afraid before realized just how close this really was. Investigators were especially worried about Briley brothers. Like we said before, they were the most brutal of the group. They were viewed as serial killers. They had committed repeated murders and assaults, often with no clear motive. In one case, they killed a pregnant woman. In another, they attacked and murdered a 79-year-old woman and killed her husband too. In yet another case, they killed a 5-year-old child along with his family. And those weren't only the violent crimes tied to them. What made it worse was that they had shown no remorse after the previous arrests. That's why James Briley and Linwood Briley were at the very top of the most wanted list for investigators. The search continued, and so did the overwhelming flood of phone calls.
First of all, there was a drip, and there was a minor fluctuation of calls, and then the dam broke, and sightings were coming in by the hundreds.
Despite the massive number of tips, law enforcement tried to follow up on as many as possible, especially the ones that seemed credible. They searched for dirt roads, swamps, lakes, abandoned houses. No location was ignored. And even with all that effort, not even one of these turned it into a confirmed breakthrough.
So a lot of those tips were scare tips, they were fear tips, they weren't helping a lot. And I don't believe that any of the calls really materialize as far as giving us direction about where these fugitives might be.
That night, around 11 p.m. in Plymouth, Virginia, nearly 300 miles away from Winton, a police patrol was out on a routine round. The officers noticed two men trying to steal a car. One of the officers stepped out and ordered them to put their hands up. Instead, the two men ran. When the officer tried to chase them, they opened fire. It was later confirmed that those two men were James Briley and Linwood Briley, and the fact that they shot a police officer confirmed the investigators' worst fears. It was just clear now. Those two were willing to kill even a law enforcement just to stay free. They weren't going to hesitate like the other two who had already been captured. And if they were ready to shoot a cop, then killing a civilian wouldn't even be questioned if it benefited them. At that point, it was only a matter of time if they remained on the run. The new problem, they had just appeared 300 miles away from the search command center in Winton. That completely changed the equation. Law enforcement realized the previous search parameter was no longer relevant, and most likely the brothers moved far beyond those areas. Now investigators had to find another way to reach them. The first thing that came to mind was monitoring their relatives and family members. The FBI reviewed the prison call records. They went through the phone numbers and names the Briley brother had been calling from inside. But something stood out. A lot of names and numbers looked random. Every time they checked one, turned out to have no connection with the brothers at all, which meant the brothers had been giving the prison misleading information about where they actually contacting. They were deliberately hiding the real numbers and real identities. So the FBI went straight to the phone company. From there, they obtained the actual call logs with the real numbers and verified names. After analyzing the data, one name kept going up more than anyone else: their uncle. So FBI agents went to the uncle's house, but they didn't raid it. They didn't confront him. Instead, they set up surveillance from a distance, because questioning him directly could raise suspicion. And if he sensed something was wrong, he might warn the brothers, giving them another chance to disappear. The Federal Bureau of Investigation assigned a dedicated team to monitor the Briley brothers' uncle. Their job was to track his every move closely. They knew that the brothers wouldn't hide at his house directly, but the possibility of contacting even a brief meeting was very real, so they decided to keep watching him until there was any sign of communication or connection. They followed his movements for several days, and we'll come back to that later to see what came out of that surveillance. At the same time, new leads started surfacing about the other fugitives. While the FBI was monitoring the uncle, police uncovered information about Lim Tegel and Willie Jones. Those two had taken 8 days to reach Vermont. They were hiding there in a forested area, and Vermont sits right along the Canadian border. Their goal was to make it to Canada, so they hid deep in the forests of Vermont, spending their nights there, staying out of sight. But they ran into a problem. The pickup truck they were driving was almost out of gas, and if they wanted to keep moving toward the border, they needed to fill it up. That truck, as you remember, was the one stolen the first night after they abandoned the prison van. It had been taken from Winton. At that time, the James Briley and Linwood Briley had been traveling with Lim Tegel and Willie Jones. The four of them stole the pickup together from in front of the owner's house. The owner later told the police it was blue with the red section in the back, and the distinctive license plate read PEI1. But in the next morning, after they put some distance between themselves and the town, the Briley brothers split off from Tegel and Jones. They said someone was going to meet them and pick them up. So Tegel and Jones kept the pickup truck and they drove it all the way to Vermont, the border state near Canada. Their plan was to cross the border, but first they needed gas. Lim Tegel left his friend Willie Jones behind in the forest. He drove the pickup into a nearby town. Specifically, he pulled up to a small gift and antique shop. He walked inside and started talking to the owner like everything was normal. And then out of nowhere, he pulled a knife on her. He demanded all the cash she had. She had no choice. Under threat, she handed over the money from the register. Tegel rushed out, jumped into the pickup and took off. But the shop owner got a clear look at the vehicle. She remembered the color and she remembered the license plate BEI1. She immediately called the police and reported everything. The amount he stole was only about $80. Not much, but enough to fill the gas tank. Enough to get them to Canada, maybe even beyond. Now the plan was simple. He would return to Jones in the woods and together they'd make a run for the border. But unfortunately, the police response was faster than he expected. When they received the shop owner report, they immediately recognized that the vehicle was stolen and they connected it to the escape from Mecklenburg Connection Center, a case that every officer in the country had already heard about. The town where this happened was small, limited streets, small population. There was an off-duty officer in plain clothes driving down one of those streets. Suddenly, he saw the reported pickup coming toward him from the opposite direction. He immediately made a sharp turn and began following it. He flipped on his emergency lights and sirens. The chase was on. Lim Tegel didn't stop. He slammed the gas pedal trying to get away. The pursuing officer radioed his location and the street they were on. Another patrol unit nearby responded quickly. The second officer moved to block the road ahead of the suspect. His plan was simple: create a roadblock and force him to stop. Now Tegel was coming from one direction and the second officer was coming straight at him from the other. When the second officer reached a spot he felt was strategic, he stopped his patrol car sideways across the road. He stepped out, drew his weapon, and aimed it toward the direction of the suspect's vehicle was coming from. By now, police understood just how serious this was. They were almost certain that the driver was one of the escaped death row inmates. That alone pushed the tension to the highest level, especially since this was a rural area, and those officers weren't used to high-risk armed pursuits like this. Now, the critical question was simple. Would the suspect stop when he saw the roadblock, or would he try to ram through or start shooting? The officer was fully prepared. If the vehicle didn't stop, he was ready to fire to disable it before it could hit him. But fortunately, Lim Tegel chose to stop. As he approached the roadblock, he made the more rational decision. He weighed his options, and he realized that fighting in that moment wasn't in his favor. If the James Briley and Linwood Briley had been in his place, chances are they wouldn't have stopped. They probably would have slammed the gas and tried to blast straight through the roadblock. But Lim Tegel chose differently. He stopped the vehicle. He surrendered, and he was taken by custody by police. This is an actual photo taken at the moment of his arrest. After that, he expressed regret over robbing the store. He said he wished he hadn't committed that robbery. He even thought, at least to himself, that if he had killed the shop owner before leaving, she wouldn't have reported him, or might not have been caught. Of course, he never said that out loud, but I'm pretty sure the thought crossed his mind. At the end of the day, this is a man sentenced to death. He had already murdered 2 elderly women, so someone like that probably wouldn't have hesitated to kill a shop owner if he think it would help him get away. The next day, police were able to arrest his partner, Willie Jones, who had been waiting for him in the woods. But the way he had caught was strange, almost unbelievable. You might think Lim Tegel gave him up, but what actually happened is that Willie Jones turned himself in. That day, he called the emergency hotline. He told the dispatcher his name was Willie Jones, that he was a death row inmate who had escaped from prison, and he said he was tired, he wanted to surrender. The dispatcher was obviously shocked. She asked him for his location. He didn't know exactly where he was, but he described the area as best as he could. And from that description, she was able to figure it out. She said, okay, we're sending a patrol unit to pick you up. She asked him to stand somewhere visible. He said he would wait on the side of the road. And sure enough, when the patrol car arrived at the location she had identified, they saw Willie Jones standing there, waving at them. It was almost surreal. A death row inmate escapes the prison and then decided to turn himself in. Jones told officers he was unarmed. Police still approached him carefully just in case, but he didn't resist. He was taken into custody without a fight. When investigators sit down with him, they were genuinely curious. Why a death row escapee turned himself in after everything? He told them he had been alone in the woods, waiting for Tegel. After an entire day passed with no sign of him, he assumed something had happened, or that Tegel had gone to Canada without him. He found himself completely lost, stuck in the forest, insects biting him non-stop, starving, unable to find food. He reached a point where he just couldn't take it anymore, so he decided to end it and surrender.
He was ready to turn himself in. He looked dejected, he looked tired, dirty, hungry, and it was obvious that he'd been bit by a number of the black flies that we do have in this area.
The sad irony for Willie Jones is that he later found out he had only been a few kilometers away from Canada. He could have reached it on foot. In that area, the border wasn't heavily guarded except along the highway. There were plenty of places he could have crossed. If he had just known which direction to walk, he could have started new life there pretty easily. Remember, this was still the 1980s. Everything was paper-based, not advanced computer systems. No instant national databases like today, but for him, that realization came too late. Now, 4 of the 6 escapees were back in custody, but the most dangerous 2, James Briley and Linwood Briley, were still out there. Investigators questioned Lim Tegel and asked him about their whereabouts. He admitted they had all been together on the first day. He confirmed they stole the pickup truck as a group, but they split up the next morning. And according to him, he had no idea about where the Briley brother might have gone after that. At that point, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had only one real lead left on the James Briley and Linwood Briley, their uncle. Like we mentioned, agents had been watching him closely, tracking his movements. They were convinced the brother would contact him, or maybe already had, and that he might be helping them. According to the prison called records, he was the person they contacted the most while incarcerated. Surveillance continued for days, but day after day, nothing. No visible meetings, no confirmed communication, until finally patience paid off. One day, while tailing the uncle, agents saw him arrive at an auto body shop, a place that specialized in car repairs and detailing. Around that same time, a woman reported to police that James Briley had called her. When investigators traced the phone number used for that call, it led them to the same auto shop. At that point, it didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. The fact that the uncle had visited that exact location only strengthened the suspicion. The shop owner had actually met the Briley brothers through the uncle. The uncle introduced them under fake names. He never gave their real identities. Since the uncle and the shop owner were friends, he had asked him to give the 2 men jobs at the shop. With all that information, the FBI placed the auto shop under tight surveillance. The suspicion around it was now too strong to ignore. They kept watching the place for days and nothing happened. But in June 19, 1984, the surveillance team spotted 2 men working on a car outside the shop. The resemblance to the James Briley and Linwood Briley was strong, but still investigators weren't 100% sure. So they sent in a confidential informant, someone from the same neighborhood, and asked him to approach the men and strike up a casual conversation to confirm their identities. The informant walked up to them and talked naturally. He didn't raise any suspicion. He blended in, spoke their slang, acted like he belonged there. When he came back, he confirmed that one of the men was James Briley, but the second one wasn't his brother. Now, investigators had James's location logged in, but they didn't want to rush in and arrest him before confirming where Linwood was. If Linwood caught wind of it, he could disappear instantly. At the same time, they were worried about waiting too long. James could sense surveillance or decide to leave for any reason. It was a gamble either way. Then later that evening, surveillance confirmed that Linwood Briley was also at the shop. It looked like the brothers were hanging out there with a few acquaintances. The moment police confirmed that both of them were inside together, they they moved in. Everyone was shocked, especially James Briley and Linwood Briley. When the police surrounded the place, stepped out with weapons drawn and ordered everyone to get on the ground, every single person dropped instantly. Everyone except the Briley brothers. They just stood there frozen, like they couldn't even process what was happening. In those seconds, they were probably thinking fast, trying to decide whether to surrender or make a run for it. But the reality was obvious. Police had them surrounded from every direction. Guns trained on them. They were armed, dangerous fugitives. One wrong move and it would have been over. After a few seconds of hesitation, they understood. There was no escape this time. Any resistance would likely end with them being shot. So they finally got down on the ground like everyone else. This scene was loud, chaotic, and surreal. Even the shop owner sitting in his office was stunned by what he was seeing and hearing. After 19 days on the run, the Briley brothers were finally captured.
When the Briley brothers were finally apprehended in Philadelphia, it was like the weight of the world had been lifted off of you, because I reiterate that these were bad folks. These were killers.
And thankfully, no one had been killed during those 19 days. With that, the manhunt was officially over. All 6 escapees were back in custody. Authorities made sure the Briley brothers would never get another chance to run. They were transferred into federal custody under maximum security. Normally, when fugitives are arrested in another state, that state coordinates with the one they escaped from, and the two work together to arrange a formal extradition. In most cases, the Federal Bureau of Investigation doesn't stay directly involved after the arrest. But in this case, an exception was made. The James Briley and Linwood Briley remained in federal custody under FBI supervision. Authorities didn't want to give them even the slightest chance to escape again. They stayed under federal guard until they were eventually transferred back to Virginia. Back in Virginia, Mecklenburg Correctional Center was placed under full lockdown. No new inmates were allowed in. No inmate was allowed out for any reason. The governor of Virginia announced the termination of 5 prison guards. He also suspended the prison warden and his chief of security without pay for an indefinite period. The prison felt in total instability after the escape. Riots broke out repeatedly inside. In one incident, the inmates stabbed 2 guards with homemade shanks. Riots were unusual at Mecklenburg Correctional Center, but after the escape, it felt like the inmates had a new motive to push boundaries. Disturbances become almost daily. Serious incidents happened, sometimes between inmates themselves, and sometimes between inmates and guards. The entire situation created administrative chaos inside the prison. Staff were fired, others were reassigned, new personnel were brought in, but the instability lasted for quite some time. Eventually, strict reforms were implemented to make sure something like this could ever happen again. Bathroom doors were kept locked at all times. If a guard needed to use one, he was given a key, unlocked it, used it, and locked it immediately afterward. Any guard who violated this protocol was fired on the spot. As for the double outer gate, it was upgraded to an electronic system that made it physically impossible to open both gates at the same time. One gate could not open unless the other was fully secured. From that point on, prison management enforced every rule and protocol with absolute strictness, no matter how small it seemed, and any violation by a guard resulted in immediate termination. As for the fate of the 6 inmates, things moved quickly after they escaped. Before that, execution could take years because of the appeals and the possibility of the retrials. But after the breakout, authorities pushed to speed up the process. The first to be executed was Linwood Briley, who was put to death in the electric chair in 1984. 6 months later, his brother James Briley was executed the same way. During that period, other inmates not involved in the escape were also executed. The rate of execution noticeably increased around that time. As for the remaining 4 from the escape, they spent more years behind bars. Eric Clanton was executed in 1988 in the electric chair. Derek Peterson was executed in 1991, also by electric chair. Willie Jones was executed in 1993, again by electric chair. Last one, Lem Tegel, was executed in 1996, but by then the state stopped using the electric chair. His sentence was carried out by lethal injection. And if you remember Willie Turner, the inmate who crafted the weapons and was believed to be the mastermind behind the escape, he never escaped with them because he was waiting for the outcome of his appeal. He was hoping the appeal would give him a chance to overturn or at least reduce his sentence. He was executed as well in 1995 by lethal injection. Every inmate who took part in the escape or was involved in the C unit eventually had their death sentence carried out, sooner or later. And with that, the case was officially closed. That brings us to the end of the story. movie. Honestly, this was the most demanding story I've ever worked on. The research alone took a long time. Filming went on for 3 days. And if I told you everything that happened behind the scene during filming, it would be a whole other story on its own. It was one of the most toughest sessions I've ever had. And if you drop a like to support all that effort that went on this video, I will appreciate it. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and turn on notifications. PayPal and Patreon is in my bio. And if you still got some energy left, I made a video talking about the most psychologically disturbed character in the movie world. Go check it. That's it for this one. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.